Good morning. Thanks for all the emails. We got it sorted out. I think it's just a glitch, but we got it sorted out. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your patience. I was sitting here for a minute going, that's no good. Let me check my email. And then I realized, can they hear me? Can they hear me? Yeah, great, great. Okay, so I wanted to get started. How many of you were around in the 90s?
Wait, Miss Boswell?
Yeah?
Miss Boswell, a couple people are having, I had a hard time too. I sent you an email. It's saying that you're in a different meeting. So a lot of
Right.
people can't sign in. So Allie's trying to get in. I don't know if she got in. She just messaged me. She's saying that you're in another meeting.
Right, and we just fixed that.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
of your email and because of Colleen's email. I wanted to thank everybody. I
Oh yeah.
started out
Yeah,
by
mine did.
thanking,
It's Colleen. Okay. Is Allie in?
Tell them
nope.
to log out and log back in. That's what I had to do.
Okay. Okay. Hold on. Let me message her really quick. Hold on.
Okay, thanks.
Uh-huh.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. All right. Who else? Yeah. Should I go send everybody an email?
Yeah, I would, because there's still a couple of other people that I'm messaging to log back out and get back in because they can't get in.
Okay, I'll go use my other email to do
Okay.
that. Okay, so who's here? Who's here just now? Almost everybody. We're looking for Kelly. Brianna, she's here. Okay.
Good morning, Ms. Boswell. I didn't get a chance to email you, but I just wanted to let you know that I have work this morning, but I did want to let you know.
Okay. So we're only going to see you for a second? Well,
yeah, I'm on my way now.
okay. Goodbye. I just sent out a group email to everybody so that they can know to log out and log back in. I think the problem is I thought I had logged out of my previous class, which I teach an hour and a half earlier than this class, but I guess I just ended it and didn't log out. And so it considered it still a meeting and it wouldn't let anybody in. I've never had that problem. It was my fault. I'm sorry. So let's get started. Let's get started. How many of you were born in the 90s? Anybody? Before the 90s? Anybody grown before the 90s? Just me?
Before the 90s? Yeah.
Yeah, before the 90s.
Oh, good,
Most
good.
definitely.
What happened in the 90s in business was that they downsized. It was a great downsizing where they reduced businesses sizes. And what they did was often take away middle management. And so businesses were asking schools to teach about group dynamics, how to run groups so that their workers could run without a middle manager more independently. And so we started teaching more about it in school. But it's very useful for other things because everybody serves in groups all the time. You might be on the PTA committee, a committee at your work for the holiday planning. You might serve on the development team. You might serve on a number of teams, plus working in of itself as a group. So this is a really useful topic, but I think it's also kind of fun. It gives you the insight into what's going on in groups and how you might better manage being in a group, regardless of the role that you're playing. So if you look on page 150, that's where we're going to start. This chapter 8 is called Communication in Groups and in Teams. And there's a slight difference. And there's a beautiful quote that says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So it's saying that working together, we can change the world. I thought that was a beautiful way to start. So I'm sending out little invitations for people to read the lines at the top. Do you see there are 4 little bulleted lines, sentences? And I thought it would be fun to have a dramatic reading. Can someone, it's on page 150. So do you see in the chat box, I thought it would be easier than calling on somebody. I'm not sure it was. Okay. So who's going to read the first one? What you've heard about working in groups or teams. Who wants to read the first line?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
It says teams take too much time to decide anything.
I've heard that. Whoever works alone works fastest, right? Traveling alone, that's a thought. What about number 2, the second one? Someone want to read that? Commonly held beliefs about working in groups. Working in groups increases creativity. Groups suppress individuality. I wouldn't have said it that way, but I've heard that, well, I don't get to be myself. I have to just go along with the group idea, and I don't get to do the project my way. Teams make better decisions than individuals. So you may agree with some of these statements, you may agree more with some of them than others. And then they start out by saying, actually, there's some truth to each of these students. Groups generally do take more time. But group decisions are often superior to those made by one person. Although group interaction stimulates creativity, it does sometimes suppress individual opinions because you may be the person that doesn't get your idea chosen at the meeting. I wore my team shirt today. Can you see it? Because we're talking, it's Valley College. Valley College. Can you see? Yay. Because we're talking about the differences between groups and teams. Let's begin. A group is 3 or more people. I have read definitions that say 2 or more people, but I think that's semantics. A group is any group of 3 or more people who act over time, interact together, who are interdependent, who kind of rely on each other for various roles or duties, and they follow shared rules of conduct to reach a common goal. So a group of people standing on a street corner waiting to cross the street, probably not a group. 5 people studying independently in the school library, probably not a group, even if they're sitting nearby. But if it's a study group, yeah, they have a common purpose. They interact over time, and they're following shared rules of conduct to reach a common goal. A team is a special kind of group. And in a group, everybody can have the same gifts. If we're all in a study group together and we're all taking the same class, we all might just have that same knowledge from the class. Same group. But a team has different and complementary resources of members. So if you think about a football team, for example, there's a group of people who are tight ends, there are a group of people who are running backs, who are fullbacks, there's a quarterback. They bring different skills that are all needed but they're all different. So they're complementary. A team has that part of it where they have different skills that are complementary. And they also have a stronger sense of collective identity. Very rarely does the study group give itself a name and buy t-shirts, but often a team will have, you know, a collective identity, and they want to be members of the team. They're proud of it. They want to foster that team kinship, membership. So all teams are groups, but not all groups are teams. Team is a special type of group. There are potential limitations to groups, and if you turn to page 152, you will see a little bit about them. But before we do that, I wanted to have the introduction by somebody reading Mieko's description of a group. And I think it's a little interesting. Anybody want to read Mieko's little paragraph in the box on page 152?
I will.
Thank you.
When I first came here to go to school, I felt very alone. I met some of the other students from Japan, and we formed a group to help us feel at home in the United States. For the first year, that group was most important to me and others because we felt uprooted. The second year, it was good, but not so important because we all started finding ways to fit in here, and we felt more at home. When we met the first time of the third quarter, we decided not to be a group anymore. The reason we wanted a group no longer existed.
Interesting. That's very clever. They came together as a group to help themselves adjust to studying in a new country. The second year they used it as support, and by the third year they didn't even need to. They disbanded. They adjourned. If you look at the bottom of your paper, I sent out the agenda. This isn't in your book, but this is really often included in group dynamics information. This man named Bruce Tuckman in 1965 defined 4 stages that groups go through, all groups. And he said, he called them forming, storming, norming, and performing. And he said, at first, when you're in a group, you bring people together. Some may be excited. They want to work on the project. They're happy to get to know each other. Some may be nervous. What's going on? I don't really know if I want to work with people. It's a short stage, but it's the forming group. Storming, rules are established and the task is being understood. People are trying to figure out, what do we need to do? How long do we have? Who's going to do what? It's kind of unclear, a little stormy, not angry, just on chaos. The third part is when they have these norms that they establish. We're going to meet every Thursday, a kind of a habit, or we work and somebody brings donuts, or we're very supportive, or we encourage healthy discussion. Those are kind of norms that they establish, and sometimes they're kind of just patterns that start happening and people allow them to continue. So they may not always be good. Like someone may overtalk everybody, and that may be a norm that we always listen to Chris because Chris is just louder than everybody. That maybe when you know that happens and that norms get established by tolerating behavior, then you may be able to nip behavior in the bud before it gets to be, oh, that's just Chris. We always just sit and listen while Chris talks for a long time. So forming, storming, norming, performing is when the things get going. Everybody knows their role. They know the norms. They're comfortable. They know the task, and they get going. Performing is when they're in the zone. I'm doing the zone. They're just perking along. The group is working towards the goals. Everybody's happy. And then later, Bruce Tuckman decided that there's a 5th stage, and it's called adjourning. It doesn't rhyme. But he said it is an important part of the process. And you see in this Mieko paragraph that we just read, when the group no longer needed to be in existence, they disbanded, they adjourned. They didn't force themselves to keep it going after its purpose was served. So that's something that's slightly different in some groups, like a family group wouldn't adjourn, or a group of friends might not adjourn, but other groups might decide our time has passed, we've achieved our goals, and we're done. And that comes up with, some people call the 5th step mourning, not adjourning. And they say very often people will have been in a group for a year, 20 months as a cohort, perhaps. So when you're done, when you graduate from Valley College, perhaps if you've moved through your group, through your college as courses as a group, it may be that there's an adjustment period, a little time you want to commemorate. Wow, that was a good group. We worked well together. We achieved our goals. And there's an emotional kind of a need to be acknowledged that we did a great job. And it's easy to see in a graduation kind of ceremony, but it also happens at work. Sometimes people work together on a project for a year, and when it's over, they suggest that work builds in a little place to acknowledge, well, you did a great job. Everybody worked well together. Thank you. Give them a time to acknowledge it and possibly mourn for the loss of the group. They may have really loved it. So forming, norming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, or mourning.
Ms. Boswell, does that happen individually too? Like
It probably does.
all in a
It
group or
probably,
whatever, but then you get what you need out of it and then you can leave the group? Would that be
Sure.
the same idea?
Sure, I think so. What I learned, sometimes groups don't even actually meet. So people are coming and going. For example, if a person is in a hospital, 60 different people may work on that patient's case. That's a team of 60, but some of them are working nights, some of them are working day. So that's a less formal group. It is a group of people with the same common goal, but they're asynchronous. And so they may come and go in that meeting. But they may have been happy to be on that team. And if they get another job, of course, they would mourn it, but they would leave. That was an excellent point. Okay. Thanks to whoever read for Mieko. Was that you, Danielle? Potential limitations and strengths of the group. I like that they do the negative first, so we end up on the positive. Limitations include time. Not everybody has time to come to meetings. And sometimes the meetings aren't as effective. There's a little bit of time wasted. So time is a problem. Group discussion isn't necessarily a wise choice. In routine policymaking or emergency tasks, people have a limited amount of time and bandwidth. So save the discussion for things they really need to discuss. But when creativity and thoroughness are important, you may have to look at what you're looking to achieve and put in even more time. So time is not always a disadvantage, but it's a factor. I say distance is also a factor. And it's harder to say that right now because we're all able to meet via Zoom. But traditionally, in school, you have to find a time for people to meet on campus at the library, and that becomes more difficult, or in the classroom, because somebody has to go to work, somebody has to pick up their kids from school, somebody lives 2 minutes from campus, while another person lives 35 minutes from campus. So the distance can also be a factor in planning. I think that these virtual meetings can overcome that nicely sometimes. That's one strategy. Another problem or limitation of groups is conformity pressures. And this is two different ways. One, you have a member who's really popular, or the boss, or kind of a known expert. And so nobody else really wants to say anything against that person's ideas. So everybody just is going along with it, conforming. But what's the point of being on a group if you're not bringing your expertise, your insight, your ideas, your perspectives? That's the benefit of having a group. But it is a risk, and it's understandable. Who wants to say to the boss, I have a better idea? It is a risk sometimes. So if you're the leader, make sure that you're monitoring so that people know they can bring their ideas up. Also, sometimes it's not just the high status member, and that person may not even know they're influencing others. But in some conformity pressures, it's just a majority of the group, and they don't want to hear any dissent. Well, we already decided, or we've always done it this way. Nobody bring it up. And sometimes that can actually be a really almost value of the company that you're in. I don't know if I told you the story of the Challenger explosion. Did we talk about that ever? Do you remember when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded in 1986? Yes. Have you heard about that story?
And you talked about it, yes.
Yeah, and I said that one of the reasons that it happened was that writing was a factor, that the information, the concern that the team had about the O-rings wasn't put on the front page of the paper that they sent. It was put on the fourth page, so it got overlooked. But another problem was perhaps at the time they examined the culture of the company. It was kind of a, you're with us or you're against us. Everybody on board, and we don't want to hear anything negative. Be a good team member. And that became too powerful for people to bring up. Nobody wanted to be a naysayer or bring up negative things. So sometimes conformity pressure can actually have really bad consequences if everybody isn't being heard. I mean, that's why you have them exactly on the team, for their expertise, for their knowledge. So it's something to look out for. When I was 16, I was really shy, and I got invited to be on the Girl Scout board for the Girl Scout Council of Southern Illinois, called Shagbark Council. I'd never been on a board. I'd never been in a meeting with adults. I had no idea how to vote. And the man next to me said, it's okay, just vote like me. So for a couple meetings, I voted like that man. That is conformity. Conformity pressure at its finest. Why was I even there to represent the youth perspective when I was voting like the 45-year-old man next to me? Don't be like that. Okay, the other problem is, the third disadvantage is reduced individual responsibility, which is a nice way of saying occasionally you see a member in a group who doesn't do anything. And students complain about this sometimes when they do group work, group projects. They'll say, well, I did all the work and one person didn't do anything. That's called social loafing. But it kind of is when one member of the group, or maybe two, don't do as much work, perhaps. I'm looking at your pictures on my right screen, not at your camera. I'm sorry, it's weird. Now I'm looking at your camera, at the camera, to see you more. So social loafing is a risk. And once you know that, occasionally there is somebody in the group who may not participate. And if you recognize that in advance, you can decide how to work around that. Are you going to ask the person to leave? Is the boss going to ask the person to leave? Are there other things that you can do? Sanctions take away key responsibilities, or can you just plan around them, depending on the power that you have in the group? But sometimes if you know it at the outset, you can set limitations and expectations so that you don't have one person who's sort of a social loafer. That's funny to say. It sounds like 1940. But the positive strengths of the group, the potential strengths of the group are many. We just talked about the negative things. There are at least four. One is greater resources. People have different experiences, different ideas. They have different connections. They have different skills. Somebody's good at writing. Somebody's really good at public speaking. Somebody has a friend with a studio where they can produce something. Greater amount of resources. Greater thoroughness. If you have more eyes on the same project, other people, everybody is able to see it from their different perspective, and they'll say, hey, my department doesn't have enough information. Can you add that information to the project? Greater thoroughness arises in groups. That's a benefit for sure. Greater creativity for sure happens. The more minds getting together, the more ideas they can generate. And there is a little story at the bottom of this page from Laura, who talks about just that situation. Does anybody want to read Laura's story? The bottom of page 153, about greater creativity coming from a group.
I can read it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. The first time I heard about brainstorming was on my job, when the supervisor said all of us in my department were to meet and brainstorm ways to cut costs for the company. I thought it was silly to make time to discuss cost saving when each person could just submit suggestions individually. But I was wrong. When my group started, each of us had one or two ideas, only that many. But the six of us came up with more than 25 ideas after we talked for an hour.
Wow. So when I first read this, I thought, is this really their example for creativity? It sounds dull. It sounds like they're going to fire people. But then I thought, well, 25 ideas are different ways than just cutting workers or cutting workers' salaries. So I thought this is a creative benefit. I mean, 25 ideas means they have more ways to pick, and they're going to be more possibilities. And so it is a positive example, perhaps. Thank you for reading that. I wanted to talk briefly about synergy because it's on this page. This comes from, they said thoroughness, but it's when everybody works well together as a team and they kind of get in this zone. Synergy means their energy gets together, and sometimes people call it in the zone, or they're vibing, but their collaborative energy enhances the energy and the efforts and the talents of everybody. So it doesn't happen in all groups, but it's kind of one of the goals, that we work well together. We work so well, we get a lot of benefit out of working well as a team. And I wanted to look at Lance's story up at the top of 153. It's actually possibly a negative. It's a conformity pressure issue. Does anybody want to read the paragraph about Lance, about belonging to a creative writing group?
I can.
Thank you.
I used to belong to a creative writing group where all of us had to help each other improve our writing. We were all equally vocal, and we had a lot of good discussions and even disagreements when the group first started. But then one member of the group got a story of hers accepted by a big magazine, and all of a sudden we thought of her as a better writer than any of us. She didn't act any different, but we saw her as more accomplished. So when she said something, everybody listened and nobody disagreed. It was like a wet blanket, and our creativity became her opinion just carried too much weight once she got published.
Thank you. So that's kind of an example. That is an example of conformity pressure, where the person they were trying to conform to she didn't expect it. She wasn't trying to make them go along with her. They just sort of changed their opinion of her when they got a little intimidated by her success. That's pretty sad. But that is a risk, apparently, a limitation of some groups. Thank you for reading about that. We're going to move on. And they have this little example on 154 of Einstein's mistakes. We all know Einstein invented the theory of relativity, an absolute genius of the last century. And they point out in this book called Einstein's Mistakes that other people had worked with him to help him. He was indeed a genius. He was an absolute genius. But Max von Laue had worked out a correct proof that helped him. And they're just saying, even the best of us, the geniuses among us, don't really work alone, that groups help. Having other people's insight, other people's skills can help us do things. And I wanted to say, there's also a book called Einstein's Wife, about his first wife, Mileva Maric Einstein. She was actually a physicist too, and they would do math and physics together and talk about ideas. So many people think that she should have been given a little more credit for some of his theories too. That's kind of a debate, but it just shows that even if she didn't help with the EM equals MC discovery, that she did help him move along the path. And it takes more than just one person sometimes. The last potential strength of a group is greater commitment. Sometimes people get together, and because others are working on the same project, they have more of a commitment to finish it. And you see this sometimes with New Year's resolutions, when people say, I want to go walk in the park every day. I'm going to get a team of people so that we can call each other. And if I feel like I don't want to go today, they'll call and they'll say, oh, come on, we're all still going. We'll miss you. And then you feel a little more commitment, perhaps, to the work of the group. Sometimes you don't. Yes. We're going to talk about features of small groups. And we're going to talk about something interesting that I don't think we talk about enough in America. It's power. And we don't talk about it enough sometimes as women because we don't have as much. So we're not used to it, and we're not even always used to being allowed to talk about it. Cohesion in a group is a degree of closeness, the esprit de corps, the sense of identity. And in highly cohesive groups, members see themselves as part of a team, an integral part, tightly together, identified and unified in their goals. And this often increases their satisfaction with the group and in turn increases their productivity. It's no accident that Walmart has people sing a song at the beginning of every team meeting. It's another way of showing we're all in the same team. We sing Walmart songs before we go, because workers then have a sense of closeness and esprit de corps. That means spirit of the group or group identity. And communication can enhance cohesion in a number of ways, but what you're looking for is your group, small group being a cohesive group, and feeling commitment to the group. There is a caveat though. Sometimes when groups are too close, they may engage in what's called groupthink. You've probably heard of groupthink, where nobody wants to say anything different. Nobody wants to go against the group. So everybody in the group just does the same thing. And they may even think that that's the right thing to do, but it doesn't allow for, if everybody's like so interested in their main identity as being in that group, then they don't want to like bring up negative ideas or different ideas because they still want to be part of the group. So groupthink is a process in which members cease to think critically and independently about ideas generated by the group. And it's not just little groups. It's been a factor in a presidential advisory boards, national decision-making bodies. Sometimes groups have such a strong identity, and members of the group think about being in the group so positively that they think it can't be a bad thing. It can't make a bad decision. That's not a good place to find yourself in. Here's another feature of small groups, and this is interesting. The sheer size of a group, the number of people, affects how well it communicates. You have to have a group that's small enough that everybody can participate, yet large enough to get things done, and large enough that people don't feel intimidated. 5 to 7 people is the ideal size for a group. 2 to 3 to 4 sometimes doesn't allow for discussion because they feel like it would be going against another person. There's so few people in the group, it would be taken personally. More than 5 to 7, it's just really hard to get a voice in. Do you want to hear about Molly on page 156? She says, the worst group I ever had was the worst group I was ever in had 3 members. We were supposed to have 5, but 2 dropped out after the first meeting. So there were 3 of us to come up with proposals for artistic programs for the campus. Nobody would say anything against anybody else's ideas, even if we thought they were bad. For myself, I know I held back from criticizing a lot of times because I didn't want to offend either of the other 2. We came up with some really bad ideas because we were so small, we couldn't risk arguing. So that's an example of a small group that wasn't big enough to be effective. Are you ready to talk about power? There are 2 kinds of power. Power is the ability to influence others. It's a feature of small groups that affects participation. And you would think that the power would reside with the leader. But sometimes there is no leader and people just take on different roles. Sometimes there's one leader, the boss, but there's another person in the group who has expertise in that field and they become the leader. So they might have more power, right? You would defer to the person with the expertise rather than the boss whose expertise is running the whole company. So the other kind of leadership is sometimes the power is held by a person who doesn't have the title. The boss may have the title, but there may be a person, the boss may be new, two months in the job, and there may be a person who's been there for 14 years, and she might know a lot more, and people might go to her for the questions, for the answers, for the information. And so she's the de facto leader, even though she doesn't have the title. So sometimes it's not always clear who has the power, but the power is defined as the influence the ability to influence others, and you can do it in two ways. Power over somebody is the ability to help them or to harm them, actually. So it's usually expressed in ways that highlight the status and the visibility of the leader. A group leader might exert positive power in a group by mentoring, by providing benefits, putting somebody on a plum part of the committee, assigning unpleasant tasks to other people as a negative power. So they might assign tasks as a way to either reward, power over, or punish by putting them on an unpleasant task if they're not performing well or responding negatively to their communication during group meetings. So the power can be exerted in the meeting or kind of about the meeting. They can either use it positively, the power to help somebody, or they can kind of use it negatively. I don't think that's always the way to look at it. I don't think assigning unpleasant tasks is always a punishment. I think sometimes there are unpleasant things that have to be done in a process, and that's part of being the group. They might just have to assign it to somebody. So I don't think that you should take it personally if they ask you to be the person to take the notes and you didn't want to take the notes, you know. But this says that sometimes that's a strategy. So they have power over is the ability to help or harm others. But there's also power to, and that's the power to empower others to reach their goals, to outline what they're going to do, give them the tools and the things they need to do it. And eventually then the goal is that the leader in that situation would ultimately be able to pull out because they've given the people the power to reach their goals of their group on their own. It's kind of a win-win climate in which each member's success is seen as advancing everybody. And Stanley says, well, the different kinds of power we discussed make me think of my high school. The principal came over the intercom to make announcements or lecture us on improper behaviors and to threaten us about what is going on if we misbehaved. But the teachers were the one with the power too. Most of them worked to empower us. They were the ones who gave us encouragement and praise. They were the ones who helped us believe in ourselves and reach our goals. So there's power over making the rules and just lecturing, but then there's power to, which is actually teaching the students what they needed to know. And they talk about the power structures of groups, and there's a little picture on the next page, but is it on the next page? Yeah. You can have centralized power on 158 where there's one leader and the leader is trying to run the whole, all the different departments, all the different groups. Or you can have decentralized where there's smaller groups with no leader whatsoever. That works well if everybody has the same amount of power. Then everybody feels like they can contribute evenly. I wanted to talk about 5 bases of power they have on 157. There are 5 different ways a person draws power in these groups. One is reward power. That's the ability to give people things they value, such as attention, approval, public praise, promotions, and raises. And we see that all the time. Teachers do that. They give people free time, they give people grades, they give people stickers, they reward them. Pizza parties. Coercive power is a little more negative. It's the ability to punish others through demotions, firings, undesirable assignments. Then there's legitimate power. You're just a designated person, the CEO, the manager. You have a role in the organization that gave you the title, the power that you hold. So you're just the one who holds that legitimate power. And then we talked about this a little bit before. Expert power is influence because that person has expert knowledge. So if you have a guest speaker come in, they have more power sometimes because they have expertise on that topic and they're bringing it to the group. So that's expert power that maybe doesn't come from their title or their role in the organization. And the last kind of power is referent power. This is influence based on personal charisma, if they're charming, if they're popular, if they're cool, if they're the favorite of the people, everybody's been there, they're the team mascot, and personality. So sometimes that is just a person who's a de facto leader. I did student teaching at a school once, and the principal was the leader. But during the meetings, another person ran the meeting. Everybody loved her. She was loud. She was kind of bossy, and she just ran things. And it was because she was her personality just was more dominant than the person who was the official leader. If you didn't know that, you'd spend your time looking to the wrong person for the answers. Interaction patterns. Oh, I want to tell you two things. Sometimes in participation, members with higher power talk more, and others talk to them instead of to each other. And there's sometimes you'll see social climbing. They say it's the attempt to climb up in the group by currying favor with the leader of the group. And if that doesn't work, the person may kind of drift away. If they couldn't climb up and make themselves get a better role, they may drift away. Not surprisingly, high power members of a group find group discussion more satisfying because they talked more and people talked more to them. So power affects communication. It says who can communicate more, and it says who finds communication more satisfying. Also, people who demonstrate expertise in the group, someone who shows that they can work hard, work well, get things done, and who build group cohesion, they tend to grow in power in the group. People see that they're a good person in the group to have, and they start letting them be in charge. We're going to talk briefly about interaction patterns and group norms. Here we go. Interaction patterns, there are two different ways of communication. Everybody can talk to each other in the group. That's when everybody's equal. It's decentralized. There's no central figure, no leader. But sometimes there's a leader and everybody talks to that person. All the communication is funneled to them. So you might hand your questions up to that person, or email that person the questions instead of just asking the person next to you. So it matters kind of the structure. If you're in a group, you need to know which way they kind of want people to communicate. In some workplaces, it's almost like a chain of command, like a military chain of command. The only people who will ask questions or answer them are the people who are in that hierarchy, and they don't even want you to ask outside of that hierarchy. If you work in a place like that, you should know. You probably will, but the first time you make a mistake, they'll be a little cross. This idea of norms, group norms are just standards of behavior, and they're not necessarily explicitly said, but it's kind of what is the personality of the group and what the group will tolerate or accept. For example, it may be that if someone shows up 10 minutes late, it's okay, but if they show up 15 minutes late, people in the group are angry. So the norm is we're flexible for the first 10 minutes, and after that, it's sort of not done to be late. Or it may be how carefully people prepare. Maybe some people come in with notes all the time and they've done their work and they send their minutes around and they have copies for everybody. That may be the norm of the group. But there may be another group where it's just kind of informal, and people you find out haven't really read their minutes, they haven't really prepared their topic, and they just kind of think off the top of their head. In some groups, the norm is that you can challenge each other and talk about things, and in some groups, the norm is that you can't. Because norms become entrenched, they become kind of almost rules. It's important, I said this before, to pay attention to them from the outset. By noticing patterns and tendencies, you can exert influence over the norms that take hold in these groups. And I wanted to talk about the types of communication in groups. If you look on page 159, To participate in a group, there are 4 different types of communication in a group. And there's task communication, procedural, climate, and egocentric. If you turn the page to page 160, you'll see a little chart. Table 8.1, types of communication in groups. And there are 4 different types. There's task communication. This is communication about the work itself. They initiate ideas, they search for information, they give information, they elaborate on ideas, and they offer critical analysis. It's all about the work, those kind of comments, that type of communication. Task communication, about the task at hand. Procedural communication is about how are we going to get there? What do we need in the meeting? We have an agenda, we have an orientation. They keep people on track. They keep people moving forward. So they refocus the group's attention on the work again. They tell you, oh, there are 10 minutes left. We need to get going. Sometimes they're given formal roles to do this, a timekeeper. Sometimes they're not. There's just a person who is that timekeeper. And maybe you've noticed that in a class. Some people are really good at timekeeping. They'll say, we only have 5 minutes left, so I want to ask about the assignment. They've measured out the time and they've figured out how much they have. Or it's a person in a group who says, okay, we have 2 weeks to get this done. How many times do we need to meet to make sure we get it done? That's a timekeeper role. That's a procedural type of communication. How are we going to proceed? They also often are the record keepers. They take the notes so that you can read them back and you can keep track of, you said you were going to do this, you said you were going to do that, you were going to have it done by this day. Those are like the secretarial kind of roles for the group. Climate communication is team building, really. It's making sure that there's a healthy climate. If somebody puts their idea out and somebody else says something and you can tell that they're upset, you can say something polite to get that person's feelings not to be hurt. Oh, that was a great idea. Maybe we'll use that for this project. They try to reconcile conflicts. They try to harmonize ideas. They try to energize group process, and they build enthusiasm for the group. It's the environment or the atmosphere of the team. They peacemake, they build on each other's ideas, they encourage. And one person can be doing any of these roles throughout the meeting. Sometimes it just floats. It may be that you make a comment that is more peacemaking or reconciliation or recognizing others. Like people will often say this, they'll say, well, I have an idea to piggyback on John's idea. So they're recognizing John, so that he feels seen in the meeting and he feels like his work is valued. So the climate is peaceful and harmonious. So those 3 types of roles are very constructive in a meeting, in a group. The 4th one is not as constructive. This is more egocentric. Sometimes people call this the spoiler role. This is the person who either didn't want to do the task, thought the task was stupid and doesn't know why he got put on the team, or didn't want to be in the team in the first place, or thought he should be the leader. For some reason, is not really buying into being on the team and so isn't there to do any work. This person may spend time joking, interrupting, talking about herself, blocking ideas, bragging, pleading for special interests, trying to get the group off task, confessing, self-disclosing, and seeking personal help unrelated to the group's focus. So sometimes you will have a person in there who's a spoiler and you realize they didn't come to work and they're not just going to be quiet. They're going to interrupt and disturb everybody. And so if you know that can happen, this egocentric or dysfunctional communication, which detracts from group cohesion, you can decide what you're going to do. Communicating clearly that egocentric behavior isn't going to work, isn't going to be tolerated in your group, kind of fosters norms for effective interaction. Sometimes the leader may have to speak to the person, or sometimes others in the group can say, it's not the time. We're not going to do that now. Okay. Because egocentric communication can sabotage a group's climate. can mess everything up. And you've had that. You've had the person who arrives late, doesn't know what you're doing, spends a lot of time on their phone or talking, trying to have other conversations. That's not the kind of person that you want in your group. All groups require leadership, it says. All groups require leadership. So if you want to participate in a group, you have to participate constructively, and they give you ideas. And then they say that all groups require leadership. And I think I talked about this the other day, but I'm not sure if it was in this class. Did we talk about leadership in this class where everybody has been a leader before? We did not. When a teacher puts a group into, of students into a group and doesn't designate a leader, it's a really interesting process that sometimes happens. Everybody in children are used to being told you're in the group and they just wait to see a leader arise. But an adult has often been a leader in her family, at her workplace, in her church, her mosque, her synagogue, on her sports teams, on her civic groups. And so she's sitting perhaps thinking, I wonder when they're going to recognize me as the rightful leader of this group. Yet the person next to her has also been a leader at her workplace and in her academic work and in her family. And she's sitting thinking, I wonder when they're going to recognize that I have the skills to be the leader, and everybody's sitting waiting to be recognized as the leader. Sometimes it's harder for them to get to pick a leader. Nobody wants to volunteer, but often people are waiting to be the leader. Teachers are the worst. We've been used to just leading discussions, and so sometimes we're bossy and jump in. Okay, I should say me, not we. But sometimes you don't need one leader. You need maybe leaders who fulfill different roles. And so sometimes it'll be officially designated. Would you be the recorder? Would you be the facilitator? Would you be the timekeeper? And sometimes those things just sort of arise organically. Crystal on page 163 talks about this. The most effective group I've ever been in had 3 leaders. I was the person who understood our task best, so I contributed the most to critical thinking about the issues. But Belinda was the one who kept us organized. She really knew how to see tangents and get us off of them. And she knew when it was time to move on from one stage of the work to the next. She also pulled ideas together to coordinate our thinking. Kevin was the climate leader. He could always tell a joke if things got too tense. And he was the best person I ever saw for recognizing others' contributions. I couldn't point to any one leader in that group, but we sure did have good leadership. So in sum, whether provided by one member or several, effective leadership involves communication that advances the task. That's the purpose of the group, right? That organizes deliberations, thinking about things, builds group morale, controls disruptions, and fosters a constructive climate. That's what you need. And then you need somebody who can manage conflict constructively. And they talk about 2 different types of conflict. They say disruption, we may not enjoy it, but we can recognize its value for effective group work. If you brought everybody together to talk about different ideas, you got to listen to them and hear them. There's disruptive conflict that's constructive to the group's climate. And then there's disruptive, when it interferes with effective work and a healthy communication dynamic, it's disruptive, it's not good. And that's when the climate can deteriorate. Members may feel unsafe telling ideas because someone else might be rude to them or scorn them or talk about them. Personal attacks may even occur if you criticize each other's motives or attack each other personally. So a strong leader will say no personal attacks and don't attack the motives. Why did someone bring up an idea? Just talk about the ideas themselves. To encourage the better kind of conflict, the constructive conflict, communication should demonstrate openness to different ideas. You can model that. A willingness to alter opinions when good reasons exist, and respect for the integrity of other members and the views they express. By not saying, well, you brought that up because you wanted to be on that committee. You could just talk about their idea. See what I mean? Don't question their motives. Also keep in mind that conflict is kind of natural. And if everybody is supportive in the environment, it becomes positive. We have 1 more minute. We have 30 more seconds. The assignment today is about group communication. And it's just a 1 to 2 page assignment. I really want to read what you have to say about working in groups. I think it's important. I think we could spend days looking at it, but we spent a day. Are there questions? Are there questions? I wore my team shirt to be on the team because we talked about teams and groups. And this was fostering team identity. Go team! Go Valley College! Yay! All right. Yay, communications class. Go Com 110. Yay! Thanks for everything, everybody. If you have any questions, I'll stick around. Otherwise, have a great day. Write well.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Elizabeth, you're here. Bye.
Oh, yeah, I'm here. I'm not doing good, but I'm here.
But you're on camera. Yeah. This is
Oh, I just-
fantastic.
I've been here the whole time. I just didn't have my camera.
Yeah, I saw your name. Yeah. So are you feeling a little bit better?
Yeah, it comes and goes, but my, like right here, it's still, I am so swollen. It's not even.
Are you?
Yeah.
It doesn't show up so much on the camera. You're the only one here. Let me see again.
I'm not, it's not that, it's swollen.
Are you able to eat? Are you able to eat?
Oh no, I've been eating applesauce for days. I'm so sick of it.
Oh my gosh.
At least I got some like strawberry applesauce and mashed potatoes, and I'm able to